The audience is starting to fill up.
I think we just need the icon for the interpretation.
Yeah, that will appear once, as soon as Jenny makes the announcement in Spanish, and then Ife will switch it on. It should appear for people. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Carrie Boffman. I'm the Senior Project Coordinator for Protection at Interaction. So the first thing I wanted to do is just to let everyone know that we do have simultaneous interpretation available at the moment. We just have it in Spanish, and hopefully our French interpreter will be joining us soon, and we can get that, that language channel open as well. So if you would like to listen to today's webinar in Spanish or French soon, you will soon see a little globe icon appear at the bottom of your screen. So you can click on that when it appears and then select the language that you want to listen to. And so Jenny, I'll turn to you for 1 minute if you want to make the announcement in Spanish.
Buenos días a todos y todas las que nos están visitando el día de hoy en este seminario web. Solo para recordarles que hay interpretación simultánea disponible. Dentro de unos minutos van a poder ver ustedes en la parte de abajo de su pantalla un icono de un globo terráqueo donde van a poder hacer clic y escogen el idioma español si necesitan ver el seminario web en el idioma español. Un recordatorio, si les molesta escuchar tanto a la persona que está hablando en nuestra pantalla como al intérprete, pueden hacer mute en el audio original y así solamente escucharán la interpretación. Eso aparecerá dentro de unos momentos cuando activen la interpretación y pronto también tendremos la interpretación en francés en un par de minutos. Muchas gracias. Buenos días, buenas tardes y buenas noches, dependiendo de dónde estén en el mundo.
Thanks. Thanks, Jenny. Ife, do you want to go ahead and launch the interpretation? Okay, I'll just give everyone to connect, a minute to connect to the language channel if they want to. Okay, now I hope people on the Spanish channel can hear me okay, or if not, you will be able to very soon. So just welcome everyone again. It is great to see you all today. It looks like we have well over 100 people in the audience, so that's great. For everyone's awareness, this event is being recorded. And we will be posting it in the coming weeks on Interactions, our BP Results-Based Protection YouTube playlist. Throughout the event today, we encourage everyone to submit your questions and comments. You can use the chat function that should be at the bottom of your screen. Please try and use the chat if you see that. If not, you can use the Q&A function. We will be collecting the questions that you submit, and then we will pose a few of them to our panelists towards the end of the webinar. So now I will just introduce my colleague, Jessica Lenz, who will give some opening remarks. So Jessica has a long history with Interaction. She rejoined in May 2019 after spending several years with Interaction prior to that. This time she joined as a senior technical advisor for protection, and she's been leading on the results-based protection program. She has over 20 years of experience working on protection, specifically child protection and GBV in humanitarian action. So with that, Jessica, I hand over to you.
Great. So first of all, I want to welcome everybody to the webinar. We're here today to explore results-based protection in practice and share examples from around the world. So as Carrie mentioned, I'm Jessica. I'm the Senior Advisor for Protection and have been leading this work on results-based protection for quite a while. So very excited to be able to actually share out some examples of what it actually means. So during today's webinar, we're excited to showcase our top winners of the Results-Based Protection 2020 Good Practice Contest. So a little bit later, Carrie's going to share about what this contest was, who our winners are, and how they were chosen. And then we'll have a chance to hear each of them present some of their work. So we're excited about that. Following the presentations, we will be joined by a couple of additional individuals, but we'll have a panel discussion, and that will enable us to go deeper into understanding the good practice that everyone has been doing around protection analysis in particular, and also explore some of the challenges that they have faced in trying to apply results-based approaches to protection. And then finally, we're also very excited to announce our new publication, Mindshift. And this is a collection of examples of what results-based protection actually looks like in practice. So a little bit later in the program, we'll tell you a little bit more details about where you can get this and when this is coming out. So we can go to the next slide. So before we turn to our contest winners, I wanted to briefly cover what we mean by results-based protection. And this is to make sure that we're all on the same page and we know what we're actually talking about. So just a little bit of a background and to kind of share with you what this framework is. So this is an initiative that started in 2012, and it was born out of a concern that protection couldn't be measured. At the time, there were several reports that showed various understandings of what constitutes a protection outcome. There was confusion about the necessary building blocks for how to achieve a protection outcome. And I think the greatest challenges that we saw that practitioners were identifying were issues around analysis, program design, measurement, and also complemented in a sense by the rigid funding parameters and timelines preventing us from achieving protection outcomes. But through the years, through a ton of learning and interagency engagement and field-based experience from organizations implementing programming for protection, Interaction has helped to untangle some of that confusion by developing the results-based protection framework that you see here on the screen. And this is really to help us think about how do we achieve protection outcomes in the form of reduced risk. So essentially, results-based protection, or what we call RBP, consists of three key elements. And you can see that in the graph by the three different colors. But the way to introduce it and also to remember these elements, it's helpful to think of three critical questions. So the first question that we often ask ourselves is, do you know what problem you're trying to solve? So this first element, continuous context-specific protection analysis, helps us better understand the specific nuances of a particular protection problem, such as different forms of violence or coercion. The second question we need to ask ourselves then is, do you know who can help you solve the problem? So this is element 2, and this is about multidisciplinary strategies, because we know it's not just about protection actors who need to solve the problem. It's how do we engage the most relevant actors to that problem across sectors and across disciplines to understand and how to reduce that risk. And then the third question we ask ourselves is, do you know how to solve the problem? So this is element 3, and we call this outcome-oriented methods. Now, which sounds really confusing, but really what this is all about, it's about problem solving. So methods and approaches that help us navigate complexity, and protection is a complex issue. So these are methods that help us think more iteratively, methods that help us be more adaptable. Some methods, for example, might include outcome mapping or the use of results journals, etc. So think of that in terms of how do you use problem-solving methods to solve these problems. So in addition, what you'll see around this graphic, there's 3 additional dots. And these are these are not our elements, but these are what we call our enablers. And so these are aspects of our organizational culture, our resources, and our systems that help us take up the 3 key elements, or they can be barriers to taking up the 3 key elements in order to support the achievement of protection outcomes. So that's in a gist a little bit about what results-based protection is. There's a lot more underneath that, but we're gonna focus in on one of those elements. So we can switch to the next slide. Oops, go back one. There we go. So we're going to focus today. I mean, all of the elements are essential, and I think you need all of them in order to achieve an outcome. But we're going to focus in on continuous context-specific protection analysis. One, because many of our presenters today and the winners of our contest were really showing how they've been using protection analysis to achieve outcomes. So this is the one reason, but also because analysis is really our foundational element. It provides the basis for all of our decision making, whether that's for how we're going to design a program or how we're going to think about multidisciplinary strategies or engaging in HCT discussions around protection outcomes. This is essential. And over the years, what we found is that the one tool that is most supportive in understanding a comprehensive protection analysis is the use of the risk equation. And that's what you see here on the slide. And this is, in a sense, the component parts of what helps us understand what we need to reduce or prevent risk. And this includes looking at the threat times the vulnerability in relation to the threat over the capacity in relation to the threat. Now, it's a little confusing, perhaps, if it's a mathematical equation and you're afraid of math and you don't want to go there. Don't worry about that. Just think about those component parts: threat, vulnerability, and capacity. It's these that what we're using, and particularly trying to use from the perspective of the affected population as far as possible, that will then help humanitarians pinpoint what we need to do in order to reduce the threat, reduce the vulnerability, and increase the overall capacity. And all 3 combined helps us actually understand how we can reduce or prevent risk. Ultimately, what we're aiming here to do is interrupt systemic risk patterns that manifest in a crisis. Unfortunately, I think over the years, what we've actually found is that humanitarians have a tendency to focus in on one component, and this typically is vulnerability. So there's a lot of analysis out there on vulnerable populations, but what often happens is that's in isolation of the threat, or they're not looking at any of the other components at all. So they're ignoring the capacities of affected communities or ignoring the threat altogether. And what we know is that in order to really come up with strategies that really achieve protection outcomes, you need to look at all 3 and how they work together and complement each other. But the good news is we actually have found that there's increasing shared appreciation for the importance of protection analysis as a foundation for program design, and also to establish a basement for measurement and evaluation. So what we've seen recently, there's more efforts underway to strengthen analysis, and that also includes the language that we are seeing that's featured in key protection policies and guidance documents, including the IRC protection policy in humanitarian action, the GPC provisional guidance on HCT protection strategies, and also within the professional standards for protection. We're also seeing organizations who are prioritizing analysis, and they're experimenting more and more. And you'll see that from our panelists today in what they're going to present about what they've been doing. So really exploring new ways to think about methodologies to do this better. And I think even importantly as well is donors are also recognizing and emphasizing the importance of protection analysis within their funding policies and their guidance to organizations. So with that, I'm actually going to turn it back over to Carrie, and she's going to share a little bit more about the contest and introduce our winners so that we can share with you some of the results-based approaches and how they've taken up these approaches to strengthen protection analysis. So over to you, Carrie.
Thanks, Jessica. So since the start of RBP in 2012, Interaction has put a lot of efforts in seeking out practical examples of what RBP looks like in humanitarian action. with the intent to raise awareness, to increase understanding, and really to encourage the uptake of results-based protection. So our latest efforts to collect this sort of practical examples was the 2020 RBP Good Practice Contest that we held last year between September and December, with support from the Swedish International Development Agency, SIDA. We encouraged all actors who are involved in some way in addressing protection risks in humanitarian crises around the world to share their stories with us of how they have been incorporating results-based approaches into their work. And across the board, the examples that were submitted for the contest really did focus on ways to collect data and information for better protection analysis, with just a few exceptions. But given the broader shift within the humanitarian community to prioritize protection analysis that Jessica just spoke about, this was not surprising to us, to have this focus within the submissions. So in the coming years, Interaction, we will continue to document examples of organizations working to do continuous context-specific protection analysis, and we will also be proactively seeking out examples of other results-based approaches. So this can include all of the things that are listed on the screen right now, such as methods that keep protection outcomes at the center, that embrace iteration and adaptability. So for example, you can think about how you have been able to adapt your programs based on changes in the context you're working in, or maybe how you've adapted your project indicators. Also examples of multidisciplinary actors coming together. So we know that protection actors alone cannot solve most protection issues. We need to work with other actors who are relevant to solving that issue at hand. So we will seek out examples of how protection actors have come together with, say, food security actors or maybe peace building actors to solve a protection issue. And also there's such a heavy focus on service delivery. We would love to have some examples of prevention programming, as well as these others that are up on the screen. So if you are listening in today and you have a case example that you would like to share with us, something you're working on or you have worked on in the past, please do reach out to me or one of my other Interaction colleagues. So we'd love to document your work and help share your results-based approach with the broader community. And so now let's shift a little and we can hear from the top winners of the contest. So the first up is going to be WeWorld-GVC, who won first place in the contest for their community protection approach that they use in the OPT and elsewhere around the world. So here to present it today is Pedro Ariaza Aldana. So Pedro currently works as the global CPA specialist at WeWorld, with 2 years of previous experience in research and data analysis for WeWorld in Palestine and with the University of Pavia. Pedro has contributed to the continuous and iterative improvement, adaptation, and contextualization of the CPA to different countries across the Middle East, North Africa, and Latin America. So with that, Pedro, I'll turn it over to you for your presentation.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Good day, everyone. Thank you for being here. For me, it is an honor to represent WeWorld-GVC in this webinar presenting the community protection approach, which is the result of many years of efforts by many people involved, many actors involved. Next, please. While I will focus this brief presentation on the specific case of the Occupied Palestinian Territory and how the CPA implementation is carried out in the West Bank, it is important to highlight that we have built and continuously improved the CPA based on different contexts across the Middle East, North Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean regions. So what is the problem that we identified? We understood that Palestinians have been forced to move owing to the existing of a coercive environment and protection risks within Area C of the West Bank. For us, and it's a common understanding, forcible transfer represented the most pressing protection risk within the context. And while many organizations, including WeWorld, were doing purely humanitarian and development assistance activities in different sectors, we needed to understand how these interventions were actually contributing to reduce the risk of forcible transfer. How were the actions taken by different stakeholders in different sectors going to contribute to the improvement of the protection environment of these Palestinian communities? So back in 2014, the European Union Humanitarian Support approached WeWorld and asked us to provide proof of the results of the work and the interventions that we were doing through systematization of data and evidence-based targeting of the communities and the affected population for these interventions. So as an organization, we wanted to ensure the proper linkages between implemented activities and protection outcomes. We started building an approach based on existing methodologies and instruments. The one that we started building on was the Safety and Dignity Manual by Action Aid, as tools practicing on the field. And later, the results from the whole of system report help us confirm that we are already working on the right track. Finally, the results-based protection by interaction help us set the priorities for our approach straight. In the beginning, it's important to say that we were not planning to build a complete methodology, but rather providing tools to our field workers and frontline workers with tools that would help them on their day-to-day activities. After testing the tools that we developed with the support from great partners in a consortium scheme in the West Bank, we were able to further test, review, change, improve, and implement everything that we had created. And the CPA came as a result of these efforts. Next. So, the community protection approach is an action-oriented approach, a methodology, and set of tools implemented in protracted and complex crisis scenarios that would help us examine geographical areas and sectors with the highest protection risks. For us, with over 20 years of experience in the Palestinian context, we understood that communities were more and more disenfranchised. How? The communities were not having proper mechanisms to link them with local authorities, and so became completely dependent on humanitarian actors to help cover the gaps in services and needs to cover their needs. With the CPA, we wanted to put communities back in the center of any intervention. The outputs from our approach, we needed to use them not only for donor reporting, but for other stakeholders as well. Why? Because we needed to provide the tools for complementary, we needed to use the tools for complementary and coherent coordination with actions presented in the context to support in detecting and building linkages between victims and the actors. Next. So, as you can see here in this graph, we are trying to represent the shift of focus as an organization we try to convey, because after testing different tools on the field and on practice, the methodological solution that we came to propose as WeWorld was to measure and capture change, understanding what has changed within the context of communities after implementation of activities and the influence and interaction of external factors. So we focus the different tools of the CPA on amplifying the voices of the affected population and actively engaging them in problem solving and monitoring through what we call the community-driven protection response plans, which are actions defined together with communities to address the protection risk. Here, as you can see in the graph, we are able to capture and measure how community situation has changed. How do we do it? Through the use of quantitative and qualitative tools for data collection and analysis that would help us capture the complexity of the context. As we know, one of the biggest challenges that humanitarian and development actors face on the field is how to properly convey and use qualitative complex data towards monitor programming and reporting purposes. Moreover, the monitoring of the change for us was essential because our tools were designed to capture essential aspects of intersectionality. Next, please. So the CPA approach is built on the principle of fostering joint and collaborative work, providing one single joint analysis and programming framework to different actors and stakeholders towards achieving what we call protection outcomes, this shift that you can see. For example, in this, one simple example that I can give you is how through the joint analysis of different organizations in one single community would help us understand and design WASH activities or WASH activities programming for one community, while at the same time providing useful multisectorial data for the HNO, and also providing joint collaboration for multisectorial activities within the West Bank to reduce and prevent forcible transfer with other actors. All the data that we collect is presented to different stakeholders in a way that is usable for them and familiar for their own purposes and standards. To make this process more efficient, we have developed and continue to improve a digital multi-stakeholder platform that allows organizations not only to visualize the collected data and process data, but rather provide tools for day-to-day activities that align with the programming needs of different stakeholders, including project management, monitoring, planning, tracking of referrals, data visualization, among other adaptable resources. Next, please. So the continuous monitoring and capturing of change in the communities through our different tools would allow us to understand how the activities implemented on the field and the external factors would contribute to the improvement or the changes of the protection environment, and how these activities were contributing to reducing the forcible transfer of Palestinian communities and population. One of the main objectives of implementing a joint-up strategy towards reducing the risk of forcible transfer has been the increase of action by non-humanitarian actors born from the theory of change of working together with communities. Monitoring the change has allowed us to concretely observe this change in the communities. That's why we do some monitoring on understanding what type of activities and who is implementing the activities on the field and how they are contributing to the reduction of risk of forcible transfer within the context. Next, please. This graphic, for example, is this graphic is an example of the theory of change in WASH activities to reduce the risk of forcible transfer of Palestinian communities. We have included as example, and you can see the different funding streams with which we have implemented activities on the field in a visualization that is most common and familiar with everyone working with the Protection Act framework. It's important to say that the CPA allows leveraging existing funding mechanisms and specific mandates of different organizations and stakeholders towards creating a collective strategy aiming for protection outcomes, providing everyone involved a set of practical and applicable tools with a different context. Next. Finally, at the beginning, the CPA that we created was something static. Now, after 3 years of continuous work and improvement of the methodology and continuous feedback and testing on different contexts, the CPA is built towards providing a set of tools and instruments that are completely adaptable and flexible to the different contexts and the project needs of different organizations for addressing different protection risks. We recognize the continuous challenge to find dedicated funding and resources for the research and continuous and iterative improvement of any approach. Therefore, we are very thankful for the support provided through the European Union Aid Volunteers Initiative and the European Union Humanitarian Support that have continuously invested resources to create the web-based CPA platform and further improving the existing approach and tools that we have been doing. Finally, we understand that the improvement cannot be done alone, but jointly and together with other organizations, and that's how we have worked up until now. So please, we are inviting everyone present here to further explore and reach out to us and to the CPA initiative. Visit our website. All the material is available to everyone and anyone that is willing to explore and use it to develop better instruments and better approaches towards collective strategies and protection outcomes. And finally, I want to use this last part of the presentation to once again thank everyone that has made the CPA a reality. All the frontline workers, all the staff in our missions in the HQ, our donors, partners, and academia. So thank you, everyone, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Pedro, for that overview of the CPA. It's super interesting. And Interaction awarded WeWorld and the CPA approach first place in the contest because of the emphasis on all three key elements that I think came through clearly in your presentation. So one important thing that I wanted to note was the organizational decision that you made to focus on changes seen within the community rather than focusing on project activities or outputs. And then there's also that emphasis on aiming to facilitate multidisciplinary action, engaging different actors, using their own language with the goal of achieving protection outcomes. And so we look forward to hearing more about the CPA in the panel discussion a little later. But for now, I'm going to turn to DRC's Iraq team, who was awarded runner-up in the RBP contest. So Kayla Prees will present their experience in developing and implementing a tool for participative protection analysis and prioritization in Iraq. So Kayla joined the Danish Refugee Council in 2017, and she's currently serving as protection coordinator in Iraq. With more than 8 years of experience, she is passionate about designing rights-based programming that preserves the dignity for displaced persons. So with that, I'm going to turn over to you, Kayla, for your presentation.
Thank you, Carrie. Good afternoon. As introduced, my name is Kayla, and I'll be speaking on behalf of DRC regarding the participatory FGD tool developed by the team here in Iraq. So we can go to the next slide. Thank you. As I'm speaking to a large number of protection practitioners today, I'm sure many of you will recognize some of the common problems with protection data collection and analysis. Protection analysis often relies on quantitative assessments, which use a standard list of questions and answers that define protection risks in the word of practitioners rather than the community themselves, thus limiting inputs and not necessarily using accessible terms. Often the process doesn't involve communities directly in prioritizing these risks. There can be little feedback to the communities on the results. And often, despite best intentions, we may end up with a generic level analysis of protection risks within a country context that, yes, is used to inform programming, but not necessarily linked to a localized response within a specific site or community. Often, these data collection exercises are repeated, resulting in survey fatigue. We might have lags from the collection to the production of timely analysis. And in short, they can just be viewed as a checkbox exercise to inform project design. However, in recognition that results-based protection requires context-specific analysis that is drawn from the experience of the affected population, DRC developed this tool with the aim of involving communities directly both in the data collection and the analysis process. Next slide. So the tool itself is comprised of a FGD question guide and systematization tool. Firstly, it provides guidance on how to organize the FGDs in consideration of different age, gender, and diversity groups. And of course, requires informed consent and a discussion at the outset in terms of expectations of the participants on the exercise and to follow. Naturally, all FGDs aim for a deeper, more qualitative understanding of protection concerns, or whatever the FGD topic of the day may be. But this tool aims to foster a fully participatory discussion to identify the risks and prioritize them together with the community members. So the question form that is part of the tool guides the conversation for community members to identify protection concerns that they see as most important to them, their own capacity to respond, to propose solutions, as well as to identify barriers to accessing those services or solutions within their own community. The systematization tool is used in parallel to the discussion to organize the information along components of the risk equation. So for example, the three components, the source of threat, vulnerability to the threat, and capacity to cope with the threat that you can see there on the slide. So what results from the use of this tool is a rough but quick localized analysis of protection risks in that specific location or site. Possible uses of these analysis could be to inform project design and location selection, to inform ongoing implementation, that's going to be, and activity is going to be conducted in that location. So for example, topics that the community identifies as concerns of highest priority to them, you come back with your team the next day or the next week and have immediately information sharing on those topics, or prioritize referral pathways and service provision related to those risks for that location. And finally, it can also be used to inform advocacy. So the participatory FGD tool was first piloted in northern Iraq. Some of the issues identified in these first FGDs pertained largely to movement restrictions and child labor issues. So those are some of the key risks that came up from the community members. And interestingly, also included risks that wouldn't necessarily have been captured in a closed form or closed list of options. According to the protection team that carried out these initial the pilot phase, the tool allowed for a more effective utilization of time. It allowed them to focus the conversation more around protection risks rather than basic needs. Because again, going back to my first slide of common problems you see, that this is very frequently in protection needs assessments that we're capturing many other basic need issues. The tool gave the lead to the community, and it produced a more realistic set of expectations and outcomes in terms of proposed solutions. So next slide. So some of the recommendations, first of all, just to say, obviously we recognize that this FGD tool is just one tool that is best used as sort of with complementary other set of tools in order to inform a complete protection analysis. Some of the recommendations that we would have would be to make sure that the tool is used by a trained facilitator who's very comfortable with the tool to ensure a dynamic discussion that is able to adapt with the course and flow of the conversation, because it's supposed to be very participatory with a high level of ownership from the participants. So they might have to adapt and phrase some questions in terms of scenarios or third-party projections. Another recommendation would be to make sure that it is accompanied by stakeholder mapping and a strong understanding of the local context, specifically because a lot of the concerns that community members might identify might be very specific to their site, for example, their informal displacement site or location. And therefore, if you're going to be talking about the root causes or some of the solutions to those issues, you would need to have that local context understanding. Another recommendation would that it should be complemented by awareness raising activities. And this is largely drawn from the fact that in order to make the conversation more meaningful and to really reinforce that participatory aspect we were talking about, really making sure that the community's awareness that is there on protection threats and these types of topics. So I think that's really a large emphasis should be placed on having those activities and having an existing presence where you're carrying out this tool. And finally, the final recommendation would be that if you're intending to use this tool on a larger scale, it would be very useful to have a qualitative data analysis software. For example, software that tags keywords that allows for data, aggregated data analysis. So I'm not sure where we are in terms of time, but I'm happy to mention some of the challenges or hear from members of the webinar today in terms of any questions. But just to say, yeah, as per the recommendations, obviously there are still challenges that came out of the piloting phase in terms of the types of training required for the facilitators, limitations on scale, and just in terms of the motivation for the participants and maintaining that and linking that to the response to really see the impact directly within the community. But I'm happy to expand on that as the discussion develops. So that's over from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kayla, for that presentation. So this tool that you presented represents a very new initiative, and it's a great example of a more light touch approach to protection analysis, particularly suitable for use on a continuous basis. And so two key aspects that I just wanted to emphasize real quick is involving the affected community in identifying the protection risk patterns and in prioritizing those that are most important to them. And then another is the breaking down of the risk patterns according to the risk equation and how this sets you up well for measuring risk reduction later on. So thank you for that, Kayla. And hopefully you'll have time to elaborate a bit more in the panel discussion later. Two quick announcements before I switch to IRC. One is that the French interpretation is available now, so do feel free to access that using the little globe icon on your screen if you need to. And two is that you will see there's some poll questions that are popping up throughout the webinar. So for those of you on the Spanish and French channels, Ife, my colleague, is posting the translation of those poll questions in the chat. So you can see that there, but do respond on the poll on your screen if possible. So without further ado, though, let's move on to hear from IRC Italy's team, who was awarded second runner-up in the contest. Elena Caraciola, Acting Program Coordinator, and Camilla Fabosi, Project Assistant, are here today to present their experiences in working on Refugee.Info, which is a two-way information platform that they use in Italy. So Elena started her career organizing events and international conferences at ISPI, a Milan-based think tank collaborating with the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. In March 2018, she joined the IRC team in Italy, and she's been working on the Refugee.Info project since then. And for Camilla, after finishing her studies, she worked in the field to enhance the protection of vulnerable communities. In 2018, she collaborated with HIAS in Quito by providing humanitarian assistance to Colombian and Venezuelan refugees. In October 2020, she joined IRC Italy, and she has also been working on the Refugee.Info project since then. So I'm going to turn it over to you two to hear about your initiative.
So thank you very much. I guess we can go directly to the next slide. Refugee.Info is the Signpost instance in Europe. Signpost is a global project that was launched in 2015 in Greece by IRC in partnership with Mercy Corps, and more recently also Internews joined the partnership. What we do at Refugee.Info and Signpost is to basically provide information to migrants and refugees, in our case specifically to Italy, but the project is also functioning and active in 9 countries at the moment and more soon to come. We basically use a peer-to-peer approach and digital tools to provide responsive information through a two-way communication. What I want to highlight here is that the peer-to-peer approach is really relevant for us because we have basically moderators with migrant and refugee background who monitor the platform on a daily basis, and through them we're also able to build trust with the people that we serve, basically. Next. So here are some of the numbers. Well, here you can see actually one of our moderators, who is Henry and has been working with us for the past 2 years. And you can also see some numbers for the Refugee.Info project. I just want to highlight that in general, since 2018, the Refugee.Info project reached over 230,000 unique users through Refugee.Info. Next. Thank you. So apart from the peer-to-peer approach, is also really relevant for us the two-way communication approach, because through that and through, again, the work of our moderators, we are able to talk on a daily basis with people, migrants and refugees in Italy, and to understand what their, let's say, what their needs and concerns are over time. As I mentioned, we do this in a two-way communication, and so we basically we use this approach also to address their needs in an iterative way. So through the messages, we identify a specific protection concern. We develop some content and informative pieces that then we upload on the platform. We make sure that also our moderators are there to answer specific questions that are related to the specific piece of content. And then also through that, we both address some of the questions, the needs, and also we are able to link people up with some of the services available in Italy. But on the other hand, we're also able to collect feedback on their needs and questions to, again, improve the content that we put out there in order to keep on addressing their most pressing needs. I think, next slide, thanks. I think the easiest way for me for you to understand basically how the project works and the impact that we have is through an example. So so far we've been, let's say, doing in a way protection monitoring in an informal and unstructured way. So the fact that we have moderators working on the platform every day allow us to get a sense of what is happening in Italy, what are the most pressing needs of the people. And for example, this was the case when during last year lockdown, we saw that there was an increase, quite a big increase of numbers of questions from people on, like most of them were really worried about losing their house and being evicted by their landlords as a consequence of the economic crisis that hit Italy during the pandemic. And so basically we gathered the questions that they were sending us after understanding their needs. And we also we published an informative piece, which is housing, rent and eviction during COVID-19 to try to raise awareness on their rights as tenants, but also to let them know that there were some measures that the government adopted to facilitate and let's say to support people who needed help with paying the rent, and also on how they, for example, could report landlords that weren't that hadn't actually registered the contract, so that basically their rights as tenants were protected. After posting this article, we saw, of course, we had a huge engagement on the page related to this issue again, but after a while we saw a decrease in the messages. So far, as I mentioned, we haven't been using a formal and structured way for doing protection monitoring, but we started doing this as of kind of November, and Camilla will help us illustrate how these have been working for the past months. Camilla, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Elena. So next slide, please. Okay, in order to better monitor and understand the needs and protection concerns of our users, so we decided to standardize the method to identify trends by setting up a protection monitoring tool suitable to Refugee.Info. It's not the classic protection monitoring because we collect data indirectly, but we still look into analytics. So how we do that? Basically on a daily basis and through our moderators, we code messages with context-specific tags that identify concerns related to specific categories. We gather and analyze this data, and we also try to identify the most prevalent questions related to these categories. And on a monthly basis, we produce a protection monitoring report where we analyze the data of the current month, but we also try to compare data with previous months in order to see how concerns evolve over time. Finally, we update, produce, and prioritize our contents according to the analysis. Our aim is to increase our responsiveness, but also to use this data to engage in action with partners and inform IRC Italy programming in order to mitigate protection concerns at broader level. Next slide, please. Okay, here we can see the results of our first semester of protection monitoring. So the most inquired information concern permits of stay, followed by travel, asylum, financial issues, other documents, and so on and so forth. And if we look into the financial issues category, we can see how concerns related to the matter have evolved during these 3 months. Where was that? Basically, on December, we received messages from people expressing fears for receiving a bonus called citizenship income without actually being eligible for it. And we found out that people made false claims of criteria fulfillment but due to the lack of understanding of the knowledge of the documents provided, because these documents were written in Italian, and also due to the lack of information on requirements for this specific bonus. We also contact our legal partner, and we realized that there could be criminal charges for this. False claims. What we decided to do is publish a post on January 15 in order to address the issue. And as we have already seen in the eviction case, after this post, messages increased because more people identify themselves in this situation and reach out to Refugee.Info to ask for guidance. Later, we can see that in the month of February, messages related to the citizenship income decreased. So we believe that this example of citizenship income shows how we were successful in raising awareness and also reduce the risk provoked by the lack of information. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Elena and Camilla, for your presentation. So Refugee.Info is another relatively new initiative that promotes an interesting approach to protection analysis. As you've noted in your presentation, one key aspect is the platform's ability to facilitate a trends analysis based on information that is shared directly from users. And one of the cases that you presented, refugees and asylum seekers who are facing eviction in Italy, and then how this sort of trends analysis can be used in turn to inform programming for risk reduction. So thank you for that. And thank you to all of our presenters. I know there's so much more that could be said about your approaches and tools and what makes them results-based. One last thing before we switch to our panel discussion is that we wanted to share with everyone an upcoming publication from Interaction titled Mind Shift. So this is a collection of more than 10 practical examples from around the world of humanitarians working to reduce protection risks, including the 3 examples that we just heard. So from WeWorld, DRC Iraq's team, and IRC Italy's team. So in this publication, there will be a lot more details about their approaches. So if you're listening in today and want to explore it further, that will be one opportunity. Other case examples that you'll be able to read about in this publication include the Center for Civilians in Conflict, or CIVIC's, use of results journals in Northeast Nigeria. So they use these results journals to monitor changes in behavior of armed actors and how these changes then contribute to risk reduction for the population. Another example that will feature in the publication is HAHA, a Honduran NGO's approach to how they engage directly with gangs in Honduras, really focusing in on that threat component of the risk equation with the goal of excuse me, preventing or reducing violence. Another one is how Save the Children in Honduras utilizes risk mapping, a very common exercise, but how they do this in a really results-based way. among others. So we are really excited to publish this resource, and when it's available in the coming months, we'll be disseminating it widely. So it should hit your inboxes, so keep a lookout for that. Now I'm just going to turn it over to Jessica to get our panel discussion started. I have seen a little bit of activity in the Q&A in the chat, so do continue to post your questions there. Like I said, we'll be collecting them, and then Jessica will ask a few of them to our panelists later on. So Jessica, over to you.
Great. Yeah, so definitely please continue to ask your questions, because I will pull on those a little bit later, so that our panelists can respond to those directly. But I want to get going on our panel, and this is an opportunity for us to take a deeper dive to discuss some of the nuances that enabled all of these organizations to embrace a more results-based approach to protection, and particularly protection analysis. Before we get started, we're actually going to introduce two additional panelists who will join the discussion. The first is from WeWorld. We have Francesco Michel. And Francesco is the International Advocacy Policy and Innovation Coordinator for WeWorld. And some of you may also know him. He's supporting the development of a new results-based protection analysis framework that's under a joint project with the International Rescue Committee and the Danish Refugee Council. So welcome, Francesco, to the webinar, or to the panel. And also we have joining the panel is Fulvia Boniardi, who is the regional GBV specialist for the UNFPA Regional Syria Hub and the whole of Syria GBV AOR. We've asked Fulvia to join the panel as her submission in the RBP contest was awarded honorable mention for the results-based approaches they undertook in taking a comprehensive GBV analysis that embraced community-based approaches and contextualized tools to inform GBV risk analysis and measurement of GBV prevention and response outcomes. So we'll have her talk a little bit more when I ask her a question later to give you some more context, but also welcome to Fulvia. And then also on the panel, who you already heard from was Elena from IRC, as well as Kayla from DRC, both who you heard earlier, and will engage now in hopefully a rich discussion. So let's get started. Just checking the time to make sure we're okay. Okay, we're good. So I actually want to open up this question to all four of the panelists, or four of the panelists. And it really focuses and builds off of what Interaction started to talk about, plus that's coming out of all of your presentations. And one is that, you know, what we've seen over the years is that there's quite a struggle with doing continuous context-specific analysis, you know, for one reason or another. Sometimes it's that, you know, organizations only focus on the needs and they're actually not looking at all components of the risk equation. Other times they take on an analysis that's so heavy that it ends up becoming a one-off exercise and never can be used again. Or just there's not space there to actually be able to think about it in a continuous manner. So I wonder, you know, all of your initiatives are relatively new and they're just getting off the ground, and you're learning as you're embracing protection analysis. But I'd love to hear a little bit more from each of you about what sparked the shift within your organization to adopt or to put more emphasis on protection analysis. And I guess really the question is, what made it possible? So maybe I'll start with Francesco, if you can share with us some of your observations of what made it possible within WeWorld.
Thank you, Jessica. First of all, can you hear me?
Yep. Good.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Doesn't look like you can hear us.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Jessica, and welcome everyone. It's a tough question because there is no probably one element, but maybe, I mean, thinking it over, well, the community-centered approach that we had on our mind is in the nature and has always been the nature of the organization. So we were always focusing on trying to think how to do it better. And maybe one of the things, if I have to mention, one of the things that sparked our interest in having a continuous protection analysis is the fact that we realized that we our system of monitoring, our engagement of the population was too project oriented and too probably output oriented. So we realized at a certain point that even if we are a humanitarian and development organization, so we realized that even in the same area when we had different projects, we were multiplying our engagement, and also the data that we were getting out of it was good to monitor for our donors and to monitor the results of the activities, but it was not okay to capture two specific aspects that for us were really, really important in Palestine. The contribution of external factors, because we can provide the best assistance, the best humanitarian assistance, but then in certain situations, specifically coercive environment, there are external factors. I mean, the occupation in Palestine is one of the elements, but then you have other elements in other countries. So we wanted to understand what was the contribution of those factors in the changing of the life of the population we're working for. And so we didn't look at protection at first, but we look at protection as one of the possibilities to have this shift. And we saw in protection two specific aspects. One is the human rights perspective. So one of the things is we realize in order to have a continuous analysis process that the outputs and the results should speak the language that we needed for the project. So the results that we could use for project identification, for project writing, multi-sector project, both humanitarian and development. And we realized that protection gave that opportunity, because protection being a human rights framework, it was giving us this opportunity to have a wider scope and then tailor the results to all the different processes. But I have to be honest, what made it possible, it was for sure probably an organizational shift on our end, but then the huge shift by donors. I mean, thanks to their push, we move in that direction strongly. I mean, we had the idea, but the push that we had and in the positive contribution of specifically the field colleagues of the donor office to try to have a better instruments and to collaborate with others. It pushed us in a consortium with other organizations where we naturally had to discuss multidisciplinary strategy, multiple way and multi-actor strategy. So if I have to say, yes, the spark maybe was internal, but it wouldn't be possible without a push for our donors that supported that and the contribution of the partners. I mean, none of what we have in the CPA would have been possible if we would not be challenging at every single aspect of it to improve it.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I think we'll explore a little bit more of that too, about the contribution of other actors and what you need to do there in terms of trust and building that. But I want to hear from all of the others too. So maybe Fulvia, you can kick us off next. And maybe if you want to give a little bit of a context to your project, since we didn't hear a full presentation, that would be great. But also what made it possible for you and the work that the GVV cluster is doing in Syria.
Thank you, Jessica. And let me start by saying that the UNFPA Regional Syria Hub is really honored of having received this honorable mention. And also I wanted to, we all, as I represent the team, somehow praise the interaction for such an initiative that brings results-based approach to the forefront. And thanks for the opportunity of showcasing what we have been doing in our approach to collecting and producing an in-depth gender-based violence analysis to inform the humanitarian response in Syria. And this approach is based on the experience of the whole of Syria gender-based violence area of responsibility. We, over the last 6 years, we produced on an annual basis an analysis which has also been evaluated as a global best practice. And the analysis is featured in an annual report that is called Voices from Syria, and that you can easily Google, but I can also share some of the links here. And how did it all start? I think that in 2015, when the first Syria humanitarian response was being developed, there was almost no information regarding gender-based violence at national level. And even if we all acknowledge it is well accepted and recognized that in any humanitarian response, first, you do not need prevalence figures to have a GBV response. And also, we all know that GBV is underreported, but still, we as the whole of Syria GBV OR, we felt that we really needed an analysis, at least of the types of GBV that were taking place, who were the people that were most at risk, how the trends evolved over time, and also how people, in particular women and girls, of course, were accessing or not accessing services, and what were the barriers. And we thought that this information was really fundamental in order to then develop a more targeted, effective, and results-oriented, results-based response. So the GBV coordinators developed this assessment framework that is meant to safely collect GBV data to inform both the GBV as well as the overall humanitarian response. This assessment is primarily based on qualitative data, and of course it has gone through a number of reviews over time because of the capacity and the number of GBV actors grew over these last 6 years. And the choice of using qualitative data is also driven by the understanding that this provides a more nuanced analysis and view of the gender-based violence within a given community. But at the same time, this qualitative data is triangulated with quantitative data that come from other sources, including the multi-sectoral needs assessment that is conducted in the framework of the humanitarian needs overview and other secondary sources. And the Voices of Syria publication has mostly served the two main objectives, which is to inform the GBV response, improving the prevention and response to gender-based violence across the country. But it has also shed a light on the GBV risks that mostly women and girls are subject to in the larger humanitarian response, so in other sectors. So it has supported very crucial GBV risk mitigation throughout the humanitarian response. I just wanted to mention also that we recently collected the experience of using this assessment framework in a knowledge product, which is called the Beyond Numbers, and I think I will put the link here. And basically, we hoped that this guidance could support others in other humanitarian contexts to conduct a similar assessment and somehow to overcome the idea that it is not possible to have any kind of GBV data in a humanitarian setting, because even qualitative data is crucial and is very important. Thank you. I hope this answers.
Yes, thank you so much, Fulvia. I'm going to move to Elena now, if you can also speak to that point, like how was it possible to do this?
I also think that also from our side is a quite complex answer, because there were many factors, let's say, that enabled this shift. To be honest, I have to say that since we started the project, like in 2018, we also thought of doing some protection monitoring, but at the time, the way it was thought, it was really time consuming, especially given we had a very small team, because we opened the IRC office in Italy at the end of 2017. So you can, like, it was a very small team. And then we decided to start again with this protection monitoring for many reasons, as I mentioned. So some of these factors are related to the fact that the team in Italy is growing. And so, for example, we were able to have also sort of a dedicated person to this, with support from technical units, especially from protection and rule of law, and also from a protection monitoring specialist actually. Another factor is also related, let's say, to the availability of digital tools. And we are actually exploring other ways for doing and improving actually our system in other countries. And what I think is actually really, really important is our willingness to kind of, because We have a small team still. I think we are 7 people across Italy. We have a strong will to stay connected to the people, migrants and refugees in Italy, and Refugee.Info is giving us let's say the opportunity for doing this. And so I think in general, as IRC Italy, we thought that it was really, really important to kind of monitor in a more systematized way the concerns and the needs of in general migrants and refugees in Italy, especially given the latest years, the constant changing in the laws and the changes in the government impacting on the lives of migrants and refugees in Italy. And so by monitoring these concerns and needs, first of all, we're able to, let's say, serve better the on Refugee.Info, but also to influence our, inform our programming in Italy. And I think, let's say, also our ambition made us work on this more proactively. And yeah.
No, that's great. Thank you. And how about Kayla? What was possible within DRC?
Yes, so speaking primarily from a field level perspective, I often find at the country level, this comes down to leadership within the senior management, having a commitment to both the approach and recognizing the importance of the approach, and also having allocation of dedicated resources and a focal point to lead the analysis process, and allowing time for that process to take place. I think that's really important. Institutionally speaking, DRC also has standardized the requirement of having protection analysis as a foundation for protection strategy and program development. There's already a toolkit that's used organization-wide in all our countries of operation for that purpose. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's a shift per se from our organization. But I think you can also see that commitment within the organization through other initiatives, such as a PIM initiative, for those who are familiar with that, which sort of teaches us to use data better and have a more clearly defined purpose, which is obviously very complementary to protection analysis. And other initiatives such as the ongoing IRC DRC Protection Analysis Project. Francesco has also mentioned as he's working on that and engaging on the path with the GBC. So I would definitely say there's commitments within the organization, but also that you can see sort of a collective momentum and investment towards for protection analysis within the humanitarian sphere.
Yeah, that's great. And I think all of you really touched on all of the key points. I mean, whether it's part of your organizational culture to embrace protection analysis, or you're seeing an actual commitment from leadership, or valuing it and ensuring that there's dedicated resources and staff capacity to be able to address and take up protection analysis, and also valuing both the qualitative and quantitative information and data that's necessary. So some really good points there, I think, in terms of what made it possible to embrace protection analysis. So I'd like to turn the question a little bit now and thinking about and thinking specifically, I think I'll turn it back to Fulvia. So one critical learning point that we've identified in working on results-based protection over the past, I think, 9 years is the importance from starting from the perspective of the affected population to ensure that we're understanding the breadth of protection from their point of view and not coming in with our own preconceived notions of what the risk looks like. And I think starting from communities also helps us to ensure our response is in line with communities' priorities, as well as it helps us understand and build on community strategies. So I'm wondering, Fulvia, can you elaborate a little bit on how the approach, which I know, it was somewhat driven by a regional level and also intended to feed into the HNO and the HRP in Syria, but how were you able to prioritize the voices of those affected by GBV? And what impact do you think that had ultimately in shaping the programming to address GBV?
Thank you. I think this is possibly one of my favorite points when I look at Voices from Syria. And it is linked also to the choice of the title that we decided for this publication. So as I mentioned, the overall analysis is based on qualitative data, and this data is collected through community focus group discussion that we conduct separately with women, adolescent girls, adolescent boys and men throughout the country. And then also based on what we call expert focus group discussion, which is mostly GBV practitioners that work within the communities. And we conduct an average of around 100 focus group discussion to inform the report. And if you have a look at the report, this is mostly built on the quotes of women and girls and directly taken from the focus group discussion. And I think that what we feel as a team, we feel that we almost have a moral responsibility to bring the girls and women's voices to the forefront, and also to offer a more nuanced and more detailed representation of what are their needs, and also to prioritize their views and experiences of GBV. And I think that in terms of the impact, well, we did receive a lot of feedbacks from different actors, including donors, GBV actors themselves, the larger humanitarian community and humanitarian leadership, etc. And I think that one of the benefits that everyone shared with us was this increased visibility for women and girls, especially adolescent girls, actually, in a context where they are often invisible. And one of the follow-up that we were able to do was to develop a whole of Syria adolescent girls strategy that looked into supporting all GBV actors to implement more adolescent girls focused programming. But also based on the assessment findings, every year we develop the whole of Syria GBV strategy that helps then all GBV actors to improve the quality of services for GBV survivors, as well as improve referrals, has an impact in a more coordinated response, and also throughout the years it helped to increase the focus on GBV prevention, including looking at long-term programs to change harmful norms, etc. And I think that also the other point that I mentioned before regarding risk mitigation, I think that this analysis supported stronger and more informed advocacy for improved gender-based violence and gender mainstreaming throughout the humanitarian response, and somehow it helped positioning gender-based violence as the non-negotiable issue that must be addressed by everyone, and it's a shared responsibility.
Thank you so much. And I think, I mean, you hit it on the head in a sense of saying that, you know, engaging communities, it ensures that they're being heard. The invisible are now visible. So it's great to see how you were able to actually engage and ensure that their voices were there. I want to turn now and build on another learning point that we've identified within results-based protection, is the importance of using the risk equation. And I mentioned that earlier in our webinar about why this is so essential. You know, it really helps us to look at the three components of risk, which is threat, vulnerability, and capacity. So Kayla, it seems like such a basic question, but it's often controversial, the risk equation. So can you talk a little bit about why the risk equation is so critical in understanding risk, and how DRC has embraced this and to support your efforts in prioritizing and achieving protection outcomes?
Thank you. So why is it so critical? Or in other words, what is the value added to the risk equation? I guess is the question here. I think it could be said to answer quite briefly in that it allows us to break down a risk to identify the entry points for our response. It's just quite as simple as that. Looking back to the FGD tool that was presented earlier, we even saw in that example that the use of the equation really structured the conversation. It broke up the risk into different components to look within that specific context. What is the driver of those threats, the location-specific vulnerabilities, the community-level capacities? So looking more broadly within programming more generally, we see a use of the equation coming through in our team's ability to assess an individual or household, to identify the risks faced by that individual household rather than their basic needs, and to propose a tailored response, for example, through case management, that would positively impact the risk faced by that individual. At the country level, we see the equation, we use the equation to develop our protection analysis and protection strategy. And by going through the process with the risk equation, you're identifying not only the risks, but multiple entry points to address them. So you could, for example, target the perpetrators of a threat and try and influence the behavior. You could have interventions to reduce vulnerabilities in certain locations or from certain activities, for example. You could aim to build awareness or the capacity that enables right holders to claim their rights, or you could advocate to duty bearers to strengthen the legal framework for a strengthened protective environment. And also all of that would contribute to risk reduction. So by going through that process, you're recognizing the interlinkages between the component parts, that you're recognizing that multiple interventions on multiple levels are required to reduce the protection risks. And of course, most importantly, that it requires the collaboration and coordination of different actors working together to reduce that single risk. Moreover, we know that protection outcomes require work from multiple sectors. So for example, cash interventions to address basic needs or livelihoods and shelters, interventions that all go to reducing exposure to protection risks. So it's also recognition that we cannot address protection risks alone. Thus, as an organization, I think the risk equation is critical to inform where you and your capacities of your organization are best placed to intervene for protection outcomes.
Thank you. That's great. I really like how you focused in on it really helps you look at multiple entry points. And I think we have a tendency to come in and, we always do our same type of activity for whatever protection risk it is, but actually doing an analysis and breaking it down, it not only helps you understand the problem better, it really then allows you to look at who's most relevant and where they need to come in order to kind of see the steps along a pathway in order to reduce that risk. So I think that's really a critical point, and then just that collaboration and contribution of multiple actors to do that. So the risk equation is just such an essential piece. So it's great to see how you have used it and embraced it across your programs and strategies. I want to turn to IRC now and ask Elena a bit more about how to ensure protection analysis is done on a continuous basis. So I know the Refugee.Info initiative is a good example of how a non-protection focused intervention can integrate new modalities in support of protection outcomes. Can you speak about how your team monitors the platform on a continuous basis? And also, can you speak about how you're working towards using this analysis to engage other stakeholders outside of IRC to contribute to the outcomes?
Sure. First of all, I just want to say something is that Refugee.Info might not be, let's say, a traditional protection-focused project, but as I mentioned before, I work very closely with the protection technical advisor of Refugee.Info. So we kind of actually consider it like this falls within our protection programming, actually, in IRC. In terms of how we basically monitor on a daily basis, on a continuous way basis, our the concerns of the people that we serve. Well, we, as I mentioned before already, it's really important the role of the moderators who monitor the platform by every day. And Camila worked very closely with them to develop the tags that we use for tagging and grouping the messages that we received, and in turn also the tags themselves were not kind of top-down labels that we decide based on what we thought, like on where the main protection concerns, but these tags were developed based on the experience of the previous years. And so we basically, I think this is we are able to monitor the needs because of the moderators. Beside, let's say, the more systematic approach that we've been using for the past 3 months, I also have to say that their kind of feedbacks are also very important to kind of complement the information that we're able to gather through the protection monitoring tool. And how we basically engage other stakeholders. I think the example that Camila illustrated on the citizenship income is quite interesting here, because we, through actually the protection monitoring tool, we were able to kind of gather numbers and specific examples that then we could use to engage other stakeholders, including, for example, our legal partner, which is like an umbrella organization based in Rome, but also we were able to engage another network of immigration lawyers that specifically, for example, deals with discrimination, but also other organizations. So, for example, community network of community centers from the Valdesian Church in Italy. We engage them to tell them, look, this is something that is happening. These are the data. This is something we should raise awareness with people, because what is happening is that what was happening basically was that due to the high amount of questions that the IMSS, so the National Authority for Social Security, was receiving, they weren't basically checking the requirements, and so they were issuing the bonus to people who might have needed, of course, but weren't respecting the requirements, and this could also lead to well, more bigger issues, and so the fact that we were able to get some, besides some qualitative data, and also some numbers to show to our partners and other stakeholders, was really relevant for us in this sense. And also, just a small little example, based on the main questions that we've received over the past years, and especially over the past months, we are also informing the programs and projects that we develop. So, for example, we recently started a new project on labor inclusion, where we have let's say a mentoring component, but we also included a component of Refugee.Info to make sure that we raise awareness and address the questions that are related to labor rights and to workers' rights that we receive on a daily basis. So this is the way we're doing it.
Yeah, that's great. And I think you emphasized there too in the very beginning about the importance of how you were tagging information. And I know that was a question that was coming through the audience as well, and how to do that. But that seems to have really helped you understand the various patterns that were emerging, and then how do you then incorporate that across, whether it's internal programs that you're looking at or engaging other actors outside. So that's very helpful. I know we have lots of questions coming in. Before I turn to the audience, and we're about to do that, I want to turn back to Francesco and ask him one more question, and because we've been hinting a little bit about the importance of engaging multiple actors and across different disciplines to achieve protection outcomes. So Francesco, can you speak to how you've gone about incorporating kind of that diverse perspectives across sectors and disciplines within the CPA approach? And what are some of the challenges as well that you faced in doing this?
Thank you, Jessica. Can you still hear me now?
Yes.
Well, I could speak very wide, a long time about this. I mean, the challenges of having multidisciplinary, multi-actor perspective are many, but interesting ones. No, I have to say one thing, first of all. We realized that our field and frontline colleagues, they think multidisciplinary, they think collaboratively, and sometimes it's us that we basically reorient their thinking in a project or in a sector. So one of our main initial point was, how can we capture this natural way of thinking when we are engaging communities? Because in the moment we are engaging communities, our field colleagues, they see the relevance of looking beyond the wash activity or the shelter and everything. So everything starting from there. I think that is the key. How do we re-put the accent and the highlight there? So, but some of the challenges, some were also are in line with what Fulvia and Elena commented. One is about the qualitative information. I mean, we can't do a protection analysis just with quantitative, and we wanted also to pay attention to what we call internally the tyranny of the quantitative data, so that we create these numbers that becomes index, that becomes ranking, but we don't capture the qualitative information. But we didn't have solution internally, so we tried to look at what was existing. So we also tried to we put in place a system of coding as well of qualitative information. But we wanted to do in a way that our field colleagues, they don't have to spend time in the coding itself, but we try to develop IT and digital solutions. So we are working on a platform that is learning by using and it's applying coding directly to the pieces of text. So let's say that one of the solutions of those challenges in incorporating qualitative information is trying to develop, and we found that digital solution, some of the steps of the analysis, automatize them. So even the processes of creating an indicator that combine some quantitative and qualitative data, try to put it in a digital solution that does it for our colleagues. So we reduce the time they actually focus on the processing the data, but they focus more on reflecting about it. So we wanted to put the accent on them being able to engage communities, so having more time for that, or being able to actually reflect more. So the all in between, we are still trying to develop digital solution. Then another challenge is that probably we are not the outcome analysis is not in our culture. So it's something that, and it's extremely important to learn from other disciplines. So we try to look beyond what we normally do in our projects. So we look at outcome harvesting, for instance, that is used to trace back the processes of changes of the population and not related to specific project. We look at empowerment evaluation, which is a specific approach to work and evaluating together with the communities. We look at the citizen participation ladder, which is an instrument to create phase and step-by-step reinforcement of the agency of population. So we try to learn from outside a bit what it was in our scope and try to learn from that. Then these are more methodological. We have many others, like for example, capturing multi-sector factors in ways that they speak to our humanitarian colleagues or development colleagues, so using indicators that are known, but try to calculate those indicators with the factor of the protection risk equation. So access to wash, which is an indicator well known, the way we calculate it or the way we analyze it is try to put the data that gives a reflection of threats vulnerability capacity. So the indicator speaks because it speaks to the wash actor, for instance, but it speaks from a protection risk language. So these are some of the solutions that we're still trying. Now, not all of them, they work perfectly, but I think that is the direction. Then beside the methodological part, the challenges is the collaboration among actors. I mean, we have to find very well ways to reflect together with other actors in the same area specifically, the same people that engage in with the same population in the same area with the same community. So one of the solutions that we found on our hand is that we could have the best data possible. So in some cases of a community, we could have like 800 pieces of qualitative data. Okay, so wide information, but how can we transform that in a way that resonates, for example, for the colleagues that they are building up the HNOs? So, and how we can use that with the colleagues that are monitoring human rights, for instance. So both, they need two different visualization, two different synthesis of the data. So we focus more on how to present it, on how to discuss with them, collaborate with them. So how would you like to see the data? But at the basis of it, I think there is something important that we have to recognize. We still, as organization in general, to do that, we have to take out from ourselves the fear of the shared results. Because I think that sometimes we have we are scared of, we want always to share positive results. And that I think it creates a barrier to share results with others. So I think that if we agree that we all work in the same direction, we have to take that fear off and try to share data better with the other actors and recognize that sometimes we are not the best place to answer. So in the same area, there might be another actor that is much better place. But at that stage, we don't look at that because we have a project and we have to intervene. So we try to incorporate a bit this perspective, trying to, again, using digital solutions. So showing the data and the analysis of real time to our donors, to our partners, to sometimes to political colleagues in Brussels that have to take advocacy decisions. So the same platform, the same data is available to everyone when collected, but don't forget the communities. So put the same data and the same planning to the community. So if we don't coordinate at our level, at least everyone that is approaching the community, they can start from something. They can start with something that has been discussed with them. So, I mean, to conclude, beside methodological solution, we are still trying to find many. The other is to recognize the importance of sharing and the importance of sharing in ways that speaks and resonates to others. I mean, I think that is the most important, probably lessons learned that we have and the challenge that we're facing day in and day out.
Great, thank you so much. And I actually really loved how you answered this question about how do you engage multiple disciplines, and you start with the affected population. So using their, the voices there, that actually gets you out of your silos of just focusing in on what you do, but actually looking at solutions based off of what communities are seeing, because they're not going to just be in their own one silo. So I loved how you started that question, because it just resonates with results-based protection. And actually, I'm going to build off of what you started to allude to at the very end, but this is a question that's actually now we're coming to the audience. And so we have a lot of kind of questions coming in, and a lot of them are very practical questions. And so one, I'd like to, Francesco, you might be able to respond to this, but I welcome others who also would like to speak to this. But there's a question about particularly around data, and how do you look at all this data that's being shared, perhaps, but how do you anonymize that data? And what are the steps that you go about doing that to ensure people will have the most relevant information that they need, but also not creating additional risks? So I don't know, Francesco, if you might want to respond, but others are also welcome to jump in, given that we're all dealing with a lot of data here.
Yeah, I can give a bit of perspective on our hand. We're happy to, if anyone wants to contribute. Well, we have, on our case, we have two level data. One is community level data. So we have the primary data, which stays in our database, and it's, of course, is GDPR and PIM compliant. But then the anonymized data, it's transforming index and indicators that are much more shareables, because those, they don't show the primary data, which is the more sensitive one. So on those one, we fill, and we use that for reflection, for discussion, for sharing, but also we have a risk analysis process. It's not that we share barely. Every time an actor is asking for the data in our area, of course, we have a discussion and we sign an MOU for the use of the data and everything. But the process data is one of our solutions. We process the data in ways that doesn't show the raw data. I mean, I know it's very technical, but this is one of the solutions. Why the raw data? Being a community level, yes, it depends, and we have some risk analysis. Then we have to say that also we have an individual approach, and on that that is much more difficult. But again, two ways are sharing the elaborated data, but the other also organize a reflection. I mean, sharing data is not just sending a database to a colleague. I mean, it's organize a meeting and discussing together. So we print out our analysis, we put it on the table, we bring the same actor in a room, and we discuss together on the data. Because sometimes we sharing data, we just think that it's sharing an email and a database start from there, but we forget the reflection part. So what we try to do is use the reflection part. So share less data, but reflect more on the data we have together with the others. So I don't know if I answered, but.
That's great, yeah. Does anyone else want to come in on this question about, I don't know if Elena or Fulvia, you both probably have a lot of data as well that you're looking at and possibly sharing.
Yeah, thanks. For my side, I think that I mentioned a little bit how we were able to use the data to inform programming, and it means that with this report is shared back with all GBV actors in Syria. Of course, I always say that data is very political as well, So actually our effort here was to try and go beyond the space that is provided to each sector in the humanitarian needs overview and document where GBV has like a page or half a page, and to really give the full picture. But yeah, it still remains data that is can be politicized. So we of course we try to provide a picture that also minimizes the risks for everyone that is working on such an assessment. But yeah, it is the outcome of the whole analysis is shared back with through this report with all the GBV actors, and also with the larger humanitarian community and with donors. So we use it in different ways for better programming, for advocacy, with advocacy with the other sectors of the humanitarian community, but also with donors. And we have actually also heard back from donors that they have been using this document for their own prioritization. And therefore that's, I think, is also something that is interesting and very valuable to us, that the data can be used by different actors.
And I just saw a question that just came through too, and I don't know if anyone wants to respond to this one, but still building off of this in the issue of data, how do you share that information back with communities? So we're often giving it to other actors who may be doing a response, or to donors to help prioritize, but the communities are the ones that are often the ones providing us the information. So how are we sharing that back, or that reflection piece back with communities? Can anybody speak to that question?
I can jump in. I don't want to be the first, but I don't know if Elena Fulvia wants to enter. Otherwise, I will share a bit of our perspective. Elena, I don't know, you wanted to intervene?
No, please go ahead, and I can go next.
No, yeah, that's really, really, really difficult, because even if we are willing, sometimes there are conditions in the context that are difficult, because you have access, you have security, so, and also sharing information back. Sometimes also you have to identify well the group of actors, even in the community. So one way that we try to do is to focus our the concept of change that Pedro basically discussed before. One way that we try to do is to, you know, the results of our indicators, we print them. I mean, basically we print them and we discuss that with the community. So it's something that we normally didn't do. I mean, we were using our indicator for the reporting. So we really open a discussion with them. Okay, our indicators are telling us that the situation in education is improved, or the situation in access improved, without touching sensitive information, but then asking them what changed, and then elaborate a reflection and a discussion with them. So basically elaborate simple outputs, even visuals, not just graphs and everything, but just to think of visuals that can be helpful to facilitate the discussion, create a continual communication channel of legitimacy and trust. So not just going the once per year to share some data, but even if we maintain a constant engagement with the community, because also sometimes it's what it doesn't help, that we go once per year just when we have to do the report. So well, for us, it's important to maintain the constant communication, and then it becomes a dialogue. So in the dialogue, then going back and showing them, okay, all the process that we did together gave these results. We are 1 year after this happened, and the data is giving us this result. What do you think? What are the changes? I mean, it's true that education changed. It's true that, so I mean, opening this type of reflection and discussion, so using simpler visualization for them, not tailor the discussion with them just on getting their perspective, but actually reflecting with them on the changes. So these are two things that we've been trying, we're still trying, and it's what we try to use.
Okay, Elena, you want to come in?
Yes, actually, I'm going to echo what was said by Michele. I think it's really important to have a constant conversation going on with the communities. And of course, this is like our platform, and our project is allowing us to do so. And in having this conversation with the people that we serve, I think it's also really important in our case specifically to use the language that they use so they can actually understand what we're trying to say in a way that it's, I mean, it's really understandable by them. And I just want to add for a small example, we besides doing, of course, protection monitoring, we have recently also conducted a survey. And I mean, most of the questions were very easy to understand for them, and were actually, I mean, we also had a good response rate, but there was one specific question that was actually using the like corporate jargon, as you said, Nicholas, and that was not understood by people, and it was interpreted in many different ways. And this is something that I think made us realize that it's really important to use wording and language that is actually understood by people. This is the reflection that I wanted to make for this question.
Great, thank you. One of the other questions that I see coming through, and again, it really builds on the practicality of all of these different tools and methods that you're all using for doing a protection analysis, is there's a questions just about, you know, what's the training needed to actually do it, whether with your staff, how difficult it is, you know, are these heavy processes, are these light touch, etc. Like, especially when you're engaging non-protection actors, how do they use these different tools? I want to maybe start with Kayla, if you can start, because you're
Sorry, can you hear me? I think you got cut off.
We can hear you, Kayla.
Okay, sorry. Jessica is a bit frozen there on the screen for me. Sure. Yes, the training required for the use of the tools. I think what is really essential for all the staff is to have, regardless of the sector, whether you're protection staff, whether you're outreach or any other sector, to have a very strong foundation in communication skills, engagement skills, outreach skills with the community. And for the use of the DRC tool in particular, facilitation skills, and preferably an experience organizing focus group discussions in the past. But building on that, I think what's really important is the tool. The training itself is quite simple in terms of the foundation in the basics of protection and going through the risk equation. And of course the questions and the tool itself, but I think it's more important of how it's conducted, that it's not just a one-way training delivery, but that the training, the way it's delivered, also matches the approach to the tool itself, so that the training itself is very participatory, that there's feedback from the participants, that how that they themselves are role playing and taking on the different parts of the participants. And I think that that's definitely some of the feedback we had from our team, is that would really have strengthened their ability to use the tool going forward. Over.
Thank you. And sorry I cut out for a minute. I think I'm back. Does anyone else want to respond in terms of how they've gone about the training aspect?
Maybe I'd like to echo what Kayla just said. I mean, one of the things we've been trying to develop training and capacity building for the last 7 years, and I have to say that is where probably we are not that successful as, for example, other tool and instrument. It's not easy to develop a capacity building process. You need dedicated resources. You need a team to think about it, because we can have the best idea on the process, on the tool, on the methodology, but transforming it. So that one of the major challenge is that. But second is what Kayla just said is extremely important. We focus at the very beginning to develop training and capacity building to use the instruments. But then we have been realizing that it really depends on the capacity of facilitation, communication of our field colleagues. So it's really that what changes, because we have realized that with some of teams or colleagues in some country where it's much more natural engaging already the community, the tool and the approach comes easy. I mean, are just an additional elements of the way they already are natural to discuss with community. In other contexts where we have much more, let's say, humanitarian minded stuff, so we are much more on assessment and monitoring a project and so on, and we are less keen on facilitation or less habit of facilitation, then the tools are taking as a receipt. So not as instruments that you can use to facilitate the discussion. So I think that my bit is, yeah, thinking very well on facilitation communication in the context, what is the best way, and sometimes not creating structure by using ways of learning that are in the context also. So those are the two probably lessons learned that we have, and we're still learning about it. We have developed an e-learning platform that is accessible for local responder and local organization, for instance, which that's one way that people can access beside the manual. But still, these elements of facilitation, everything is what we want to focus next, because it's really, really, really key. I mean, that's what makes the change.
And for me, maybe if I can add, I think that to somehow links with the previous question as well. But the methodology that we have used, it's not to send a team of facilitators, but actually the focus group discussion are conducted by existing protection, GBV, child protection organizations that are working throughout Syria. And because this is the assessment of the sector, of the GBV sector, and it involves also the protection, child protection and mine action. So it really is based, so we ask each organization basically to conduct a maximum of 4 focus group discussions. So 1 with women, 1 with adolescent girls, 1 with adolescent boys, and 1 with men in the community where they are already working. So first, as a criteria, they have to be already protection GBV practitioners. And second, they have to be working in the community. So basically, this has allowed us to reduce the training to specifically going through the terminology that is used in the tool, the facilitation skills, note-taking skills, and going in details through the tools. The tools are, of course, translated into Arabic. The facilitation is done in Arabic, etc., and then everything is translated again. So I think that we do conduct a training related to these aspects, but by engaging with organizations that are already in the field and are already protection GBV practitioners has somehow limited the challenges in terms of trainings and capacity building.
Great. And we're getting close to time, I think, and I do have one more question I want to ask the panelists, all of them. But before that, I actually want to squeeze in one more from the audience that I just saw come through, and I think it's a really critical one because it's part of that risk equation that we often forget about, which is the capacity or the strategies that already exist within communities. So can anyone talk a little bit about that experience, or how you understand the capacities and how that's you've been able to leverage community strategies in your own then thinking about responding to risk? Does anyone have any thoughts around that aspect about leveraging community engagement in their own strategies?
I don't want to be always the first, but maybe I have some.
Go ahead.
Sorry for that. No, that's a great question, because leveraging community capacity is important, because it's not important, but it's tricky in a way that community capacity is not just physical capacity; it's even the knowledge, the understanding they have of the situation, and that is really tough to be leveraged. And also sometimes the understanding they have is limited to the information they have. So you have to work with the community to support them in taking better decisions. So that is the exercise we try to do. And we have several examples. We changed completely even interventions that were planned for years in a certain area, because the local knowledge gave us nuances of the understanding of the context that it was impossible for us to identify with questionnaires or with multi-sectors. So we have many examples, but using one water network to be built, identified during 10 years by different organizations in the same area, thanks to the community, the engagement of the community, we understood that there were internal dynamic between the ministries that could be leveraged in order not to build a new water network. And that just came from their knowledge. So we managed to leverage our negotiation process, and we managed to have access without investing money to create a new water network. I mean, and that's a strategy that was suggested by them, because also they wanted to be at the center, because they wanted to be linked to the service provider, not having something provided by humanitarians, so they could have access to the remedies. So that's one of the multiple examples, but the key is there is not just the solution they provide. We don't have to take the wish list, okay? So we want this is not the capacity. The capacity is really understanding how do they reflect about the issue, reflect with them, and then using to rethink our strategy. So also our strategy have to be flexible. I know that I didn't answer, but this is coming a lot from our.
Yeah, no, I actually like how you responded too, because it's not just about getting a list of the solutions, but it's actually working with them in the way that they think, the way that they understand the context, and what that means in terms of thinking about problem solving, and how they are there with us to do that. So excellent. So we are very close to time, and so I want to now give everyone a really quick chance, maybe just 1 or 2 points, to be able to share with us what you think is the #1 thing kind of that we need to have in order to prioritize or to improve or strengthen protection analysis, whether that's around resources or capacity or whatever. If you can share your one kind of wish, I guess, and maybe to add on to that as well is how could donors support you better and your partners to improve protection analysis? So I'm going to start with Kayla, if you could start us off first.
Sure. Well, I think, I mean, for sure, the standard answers to this is, you know, in terms of dedication of resources, you know, investment in IMOs and, you know, the dedicated focal point. I think that came through in the poll. That was the #1 answer from everybody participating today. But I would say, stepping a bit beyond that, I would say it's also really important to recognize that there needs to be investment in protection analysis across the different phases of the response. So not just in the emergency phase. So recognizing that we need to continue to support that as an ongoing process across the phases. And so we're not just trying to tack it on at one part or another, or you know, losing everything that's been developed, but continuing to build on that foundation as the response evolves. And secondly, I guess the request would be, we see a greater recognition of the importance of protection analysis now for protection actors as a requirement, for example, to secure funding for protection programming. But I would like to also see that being put on other sectors. So that requirement maybe from donors somehow being applied to other sectors also, and undertake a risk analysis and mitigation plan within their other sectors. So when we're talking about protection mainstreaming, or when we're also talking about pooled funding mechanisms in different countries, that there could be a greater emphasis on having that risk analysis and mitigation process required from other sectors as well as the protection sector.
Great, thank you so much, Kayla. That's great. Elena?
I think from our side, well, of course, it's let's say resources more in general and capacity from the staff, particularly speaking for us. But I would also like to point out that I think, especially for the Italian context, more cooperation among the different actors would be very important, because I mean, there are many organizations collaborating, but it's kind of also a highly competitive context where to work with. So I think it's really important that the actors actually kind of start to work together at a broader level to be able to mitigate the risk and respond to the needs of the migrants, and in our case, migrants and refugees in Italy.
Great, thank you. And how about Fulvia?
Yeah, so I would say that first and foremost, what is needed is the will. So the will to understand the specific risks and how they impact the life of different people. Even though, of course, sometimes the will is not the only one if it's not supported by capacity funds, etc. I think that based on my experience, when we talk about GVB as well as other protection risks, I think it's what is really important is to look at the intersectionality of different risks. So for the case of GBV, when we do our analysis, we do use women and girls as an umbrella term, but then in reality, we try to shed lights on the specific risks and vulnerability of different kind of women and girls, including widows, adolescent girls, head of households, women and girls with disabilities, older women, women and girls living in camps, etc. And then lastly, and in particular for GBV, and to really understand GBV risks more effectively, I think, and I would strongly encourage to use a feminist approach to analysis, which is somehow in line with a feminist definition of gender-based violence that is as the representation of unequal gender hierarchy. And in conclusion, for donors, I think that I would advocate for donors to continue supporting such analysis. As I mentioned before, we hear that these are important and useful also for their prioritization. And for GBV specifically, I think that there should be a consistent increase in the support of GBV prevention, response, and risk mitigation, as I see it as being a bit of a shame that GBV sector, it is still one of the least funded in all humanitarian responses.
Thank you. And Francesco,
Thanks.
you have the last word. We're definitely at time, but if you have like one quick thing.
Well, I think that I have many things that I could say, but we need the donors to be the champions of fostering collaborative and reflection. I mean, I think that we as individual in humanitarian development organization, we want to collaborate, but I mean, we are constrained by mandates, by other things, competition and everything. So the shift is there. Donors have to be the champion of this reflection and collaborative, and they can do that in many very simple ways. It's not just increasing the investment. It's not re-asking for increasing the investment. Sometimes it's to reflect on how you're already investing. For example, if you want to do analysis at the field level, donors, they don't have just to accept field staff that does monitoring for the project. I mean, they have to accept the possibility of including people that just focus on the analysis, focus on fostering collaboration, fostering the reflection. I mean, our field colleagues are overstretched. I mean, we keep asking, we have a big challenge with our approach because it requires wide collaboration and wide discussion. So we have this forth and back with our colleagues and partner colleagues that say, yeah, I understand I have to share with this plan, with this actor, but I don't have time. We don't have the capacity. So the change there comes from the donor being the champion of it. I mean, now there is many discussion about joint programming, joint analysis, collective outcome. I realized that probably centrality of protection might be one element that can help leveraging together the process and multi-sector processes, and then looking at what you have to invest within the organization, be much more flexible, but with the goal of engaging community and foster reflection. I mean, if they are not the champion, we will move very slowly. So that for me, probably it's more for a call for action than something specific.
No, that's great. And I think everybody made some really great points that I hope that we all take home with us. We are at time, and so I want to thank everybody, starting with our panelists and the presenters today who contributed in all of your projects and initiatives that obviously got you in as a winner to our contest, but in general, we had so many different entries as well. So we're so excited to see so many people and organizations really emphasizing and trying to adopt results-based approaches to protection and protection analysis. I'd also like to thank our donor, CETA, who's actually made it possible for us to host this webinar, to collect these examples, and hopefully we are able to share those more and more in the coming months to illustrate it more and how to take them up more practically. And last but not least, certainly, is our audience. Everybody who engaged, lots of questions coming in. We'll definitely share out this recording. We'll have it on our YouTube channel that we have. It's a results-based protection playlist, so you'll be able to download that and listen, and also receive all the resources that everyone talked about. And lastly, please stay tuned and keep an eye out for our up and coming publication, which is Mindshift. You should probably see it in the next month or 2 months, I would expect, in the summertime. So we're really excited about that. With that, just thanks everybody for joining. And we had a great, rich discussion, and I'm looking forward to the next one.
Thank you very much for the organization.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot for this. Thanks a lot to everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Have a great
Bye.
day.
Bye.